So you okay just to carry on from where we
carry the left off, that's fine.
We sort of worked our way through to probably primary school with you. Can I maybe ask what your sort of overall memory, your sort of best and your worst memories are of primary school?
Well, your interesting one is, and it has to be as far as that generation is concerned, the 50s, and that is that you're always a tally. But yeah, we didn't take it, at least me personally never took it as an insult. It never really bothered me one way or another what I was called. You were friends and it was all, because you called everybody names. At that age there, it's possibly harmless humour. And even to this day, they still call the ice cream van the Taliban. No pun intended, it's close to Taliban, but you tended to get through it. I mean, the one thing about the schools, certainly around here, there were massive, massive classes. We had a class of 60 with one teacher, which, all right, you're very young, so you don't quite appreciate. You start at 5, you don't realise that there's only one woman controlling so many of you. It's only when you get a bit older and you start looking back, you think, God, that was a large class. I was fortunate enough in secondary to go to a school which had no class larger than 20 per teacher. On average, they varied between 12 to 20 in size, which was always a manageable size for any one teacher. So you always wonder how one teacher controlled 60.
And would the tally name, would that be from most people in your class, or would it just be in terms of an argument or something?
No, not really. It was sometimes it would be, no, in actual fact, it was mostly tongue-in-cheek humour. It was never in an argument. Never, I can remember, in any argumentative state. It was always used as a joke or an emphasis, the fact I was Italian. We'll go down to the cafe, you're in a tally shop. The tally shop would do great ice cream and things like this. So it was always an identification to what you were related to and what you did.
Nothing that is part of an insult like a tally bastard?
No. Not that I'm aware of. In fact, even now you get one or two of my friends who say, oh, you're a tally bastard, but it's a joke. It's not, I don't take offence to it, in other words.
I remember you saying that there were some other Italian families at the school as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
In your class, or were they started?
No, in my class, I was my own, but when it came to the senior schools, there was probably, I think the first 3 years of primary school there were Italians from this area, but they varied in the first 3 years. They were at the same school but not in the same class, because one chap was in a year lower than me. There was me, my own, in 1 year, and there was another chap, the other chap's brother, who was in the year above. When I went to school in Edinburgh, or the East Coast, it was a completely different story, in the sense I had virtually no Italians until the third year. Then they started to appear in dribs and drabs. But my father was probably, as I said to you before, my father was one of the very few who had a further education. He was a chartered accountant, had a couple of degrees. It was him that decided that I should go to a non-denominational school, as that he had gone to a purely religious school, and albeit had its strong points, it had very many weak points. He felt religion was important, but on a Sunday. And most of the local Italians of my generation here either went to Fort Augustus or St Joseph's in those days.
Here at primary school age, was there any feeling of affinity with you and the fellow people from Italian families?
In fact, they had the cafe along the road, so we saw each other every day. Our parents were not related, but were friendly. And because my father was the chartered accountant of that generation, he did a lot of their books. So even Italians not from the area, from outside the area, would come to my father on occasions. So I got to know a lot of Italians through my father's job, and through my father's secondary profession, for want of a better word, which was accountancy.
Were there any sort of celebrations, festivals for Italian families in your time at primary school years here?
Not really. By that time there was the Italian club, but it wasn't really, in those days it wasn't open to youngsters. I believe probably in the late 60s, early 70s, they started doing things which involved Italian children a lot more. Now,
where is the Italian club?
Now it's in Union Street in Greenock, whereas before it was in Westbrook Hall Street in Greenock, above a Chinese restaurant round the back, in actual fact. But now they do more, they give Italian lessons on a Friday and things, which the Italian government subsidises. They also have, well, they used to have, and I don't know, the only reason I don't know is because I'm not involved that much anymore, but they used to have every summer in Alva or Whiteinch, they would have a summer reunion where all the Italian clubs of Scotland would meet, and it would have like a sports day. They called it a raduno, or a scampagnata, and they had picnics and meals, and they have football games and athletics and whatnot. So it involved the whole family, and invariably it was attended by the Italian consul in those days, who was based in Edinburgh. He would come along and he would open it or close it or whatever. I used to go along for the soccer. I used to play quite a lot of soccer, so I was always there at the soccer, but I don't know if this goes on anymore. It's like everything else. When you start to get, I mean, both my parents are Italian. I have a very strong affinity with Italy. As I said, I've lived and worked in Italy. But once you start getting to a stage of working in this country, you start losing contact, so you have to work to keep the contact. Now, I'm a member of the Italian club, and I keep my membership going, purely because I think it's good for the children to keep an identity and a culture. But how much actually goes on depends a lot on the older people, because running clubs, like everything else, as we said earlier on, it needs time and it needs dedication. And if they don't have the time to run it, or correction, I don't have a time to run it, or somebody else like me doesn't have a time, things slip by. So luckily enough, there's quite a few retired people at the moment, so they're still involved, and I believe they meet on a Tuesday night at least once a week. But we do have a snooker table, we do have a bar, but I believe it's only open once or twice a week, apart from the Italian classes.
You know if your parents were involved in the 50s with it?
My parents used to go to dinners and functions run by the Italian club. Whether they were a member or not, I don't know. I would imagine they probably were, but I wouldn't stake my life on it. My father was never one for... My mother loved going to social events, my father didn't. I suppose I'm a bit like him. I don't like dancing, and neither did he, much to my mother's dismay, because she enjoyed them. So therefore, you know, if he didn't want to go, my mother couldn't go. So that was one of those situations. But we haven't had any big dinner dances run by the Italians in this area now for a good many years. We've had the odd function up at the Italian club, but not a proper dinner dance as we used to have.
In primary school, were you aware of any other individual children or groups from other backgrounds, any Asian families? Or?
Strange enough, I was the only foreigner as far as I was aware. In those days, I don't think Guruk had any Asians staying here. In fact, I'm absolutely positive there was no Asians living in Guruk in those days, because all the corner shops and stores were all owned by Scottish people. And the same goes for even the restaurants. There wasn't a Chinese restaurant, there wasn't a Chinese carry-out. There were Italian chip shops and there were Italian ice cream shops, but never...
The guy just left.
Oh,
Casey's the home.
oh. Right, so, at that point there, I was possibly the only outsider. Well, people like me, not just me.
Can you recall how you felt then in this situation of being the only outsider in the school?
The only two occasions I ever felt out of the ordinary was for my eating habits, because we ate purely Italian food. My mother cooked purely Italian food, firstly, and secondly, I had easy access to ice cream, which I was the envy of every child. I was possibly weaned in ice cream as opposed to milk, but I never felt different in any other way. I was never made to feel different in any other way.
Did the teachers ever make reference to your background?
Linda!
I'll phone you down,
Taylor, is Linda there?
She'll phone down in a minute.
Okay, because I'm not on the phone for her, so.
Right. Somebody on the phone, Linda. Sorry. I've lost my train of thought there.
I was asking if the teachers had ever
No.
made reference.
Teachers never made any references. I was fortunate enough that most teachers knew my parents anyway. So that was prior to me going to school. And most of them had actually come into the cafe as children. And therefore had built up a relationship with my parents beforehand. So I was never... Guruk was actually probably quite sheltered an environment, even compared to Greenock. We didn't have any of the issues that Greenock had, or even Glasgow. I mean, I know Glasgow around the 50s started having an Asian influx, but Guruk had nothing, and I don't believe Greenock had any. I don't think so anyway, but it's like everything else, it just develops over the years.
Where would you have placed yourself as a boy on this social ladder? Did you feel a sense of pride and superiority being of Italian extract, or inferiority?
Neither. That sounds strange. I didn't feel superior, I didn't feel inferior. As I said, the only differences I felt were actually just predominantly in eating habits and culture. My mother was because I was an only child, I didn't get allowed to go out as much as the others, albeit I did eventually get out as often as the others did. And we always used to play about the streets and the beach or something like this. I didn't feel any different from them. I didn't feel any superior or any different from them. I said the only thing that made me feel slightly different was the fact, childish thing, I had access to ice cream and sweets that were there. I was not classified as something special to me because I was there all the time. And my friends, if anything, were envious of that, but only that. You're a child. Your needs are simple. You like sweets, you like ice cream. You don't have the need for anything more. Monetary values didn't have a value in those days because pocket money was nothing. We didn't have much to spend on penny carols and things. Well, I had them on my doorstep. So I didn't even really get in fact, I didn't get any pocket money all through primary school because I never needed it.
What were your best subjects at school?
Primary school, I had a report card which was nothing better than always average. I was never bad and I was never good. Secondary school, I started to specialise a bit more and I started to study. I was quite lazy when it came to studying at primary school because my father was very intelligent and he was also not the easiest man to understand if he was trying to explain something as homework, because he would always automatically assume you understood. Whereas my mother didn't really get to grasp with it. So I had to kind of muddle my way through primary school. When I went to secondary school, because the schools were lower numbers and were a lot closer, I had to study. And it was a boarding school, so I couldn't get away from not studying. So at that point there, it was always a lot easier for me to understand the studying side of things. And I started to specialise in things like geography, history, a little bit of art, and not mathematics so much, but arithmetic. English was a struggle, strangely enough. But I did do enough to get through and study down in London afterwards, and then I went to university in Italy after that. So I was never a genius by any stretch of imagination. I was possibly around average or a little bit above average, but not everything I had to do. I had to study hard. I was a crammer. I hated studying, so therefore I ended up having to do it always at the wire.
Were you involved in the decision to go to boarding school for secondary?
At a point, yes. Obviously, given the choice, I said no initially. Because being an only child, you know that if you go away, you have to look after yourself. So that was one of the main reasons why I said no. But the overall decision was made by both my parents, and all the common entrance exams that I took, I passed. The only subject I failed in was Latin, and it was only in one school that had to be. Otherwise, Latin was a dead subject in the other schools, even though we studied it. It wasn't classified as important. Strangely enough, in that common entrance exam, the teacher asked me, do I speak Latin? And of course I said yes, which was true. I understood Latin, but the Latin Mass, because in those days the Mass was said in Latin, and we as children used to learn it parrot fashion. So of course he asked me to say something in Latin, and I rattled off the Our Father in Latin, Pater Noster, Quies in Chile, and he looked at me and said, no, I don't think you've quite grasped what I'm asking, can you read Latin? So he gave me a Latin book, and obviously it was totally different, but that was the only thing.
What do you think your parents' motivations were in wanting you to go to a boarding school?
I think primarily to make me work, or to make me study. That was the first objective. The second objective was to give me a chance to see there was more in life. Right now, fortunately enough, my parents were in a position they could afford to send me to boarding school. In those days, the fees were nothing like they are now. But also, boarding schools are nothing like they are now. Now they're a lot more luxurious. In those days, they were not quite Tom Brown school days, but they were quite rough and ready, and you were out and about in all weathers. Health and safety never had an issue. You know, you had a cross country, if it was hailstones and freezing cold and snow, you still did it. But you know, times have changed, values have changed. There wasn't the snob value. The other most important valuation was my father's making me understand that, albeit religions are important, it wasn't a predetermining factor. Because it being a non-denominational school, I had a chance to share classes with pupils who came and went to different churches every Sunday, and that was a bit strange for the first 3 or 4 months, because obviously I was used to being at primary school where you went to church and you went to school with the same people. Then from the age of 11, I'm sitting in the same class with 12 people, 15 or even 20 people, and we're all going to different churches on a Sunday. That was strange to understand at first. Then I realised it wasn't an issue. It was the environment that I'd lived in that had made it an issue. And once I understood that, or once I came to terms with it, I realised that religion's very personal, but it shouldn't dictate who your friends are.
Did it make you question your own Catholic faith?
I was fortunate enough to try them all, and I could, and I was in a position to try them all, and I was driven by two reasons. One, I quite liked the monk, because I was fortunate enough to go to Monroe Abbey, which was close to the school, who was very pleasant. But also, they made a great breakfast. When you're at boarding school, one of the things you look for is good food. So I went to Monroe and I stayed that way. But I appreciate everybody else's religion, and if they're happy with it, I'm happy with it. And I would never impose myself and my beliefs on anybody, like I wouldn't expect anybody to impose it on me. It's a matter of choice, and it made me understand that you could have a choice, and you're allowed to have a choice, and it should never be dictated to. And this goes for all the religions. I'm probably, in some people's views, I could probably be overly lax or overly apathetic towards it. I'm not. I have my personal beliefs, and that's it. But I don't impose them on anybody. If somebody wants to follow me, fine. If they don't, fine. Everybody's got their own view, and it has made me very, very tolerant to accept. I have also developed a very switched off view for Celtic and Rangers in the west of Scotland. I take great delight in saying I support Morton and AC Milan, because as far as I'm concerned, AC Milan was the team my father played for, and Morton's a local team, but they have no religious undertones in any of the two teams. And albeit the clubs have attempted to change this, you're never going to change it unless you change it at grassroots, which unfortunately starts from schools or at home. And it's a very strange scenario, having come from a family that have always either believed or not believed in your religion, but have never taken religion as being something that I should go and slap somebody in the face with. To find that there are people who you would classify as being normally very sensible people, until you get them in front of a Celtic Rangers game, and then you listen to what comes out of their mouth, and you think, okay, hold on, this is not just football supporters, this is a bit more. And unfortunately, half of them probably couldn't even tell you what they're saying and what it meant, because invariably it would have an underlying historical meaning, but nothing I deem as being important.
And is the Catholic Church still important to you today?
I don't go. I'm a lazy Catholic. I have lots of friends that are priests and various things like this, but I also have one or two friends that are ministers. One's a vicar in England. So religion's never been important to me, but it's never been not important. It's there. And as I said, in my own mind, I know what I want or what I believe in, but I don't go around broadcasting it. I don't think I need to, because it's only for me and my benefit, nobody else.
Just to touch briefly on the food issue that you raised, what was your diet then, sort of growing up in Gourock, and how would that differ?
It was always Italian. Spaghetti, brodos, which are a soup, frittatas, things like this. And the interesting thing about it was, and it always amazed me, I remember at school lunch, I never stayed for school lunch because school was over here, but one day I did, and it had on the menu spaghetti, and I thought, absolutely brilliant spaghetti, this is great, I can't ask for any more. Until I saw what the definition of spaghetti was. I looked at it, and it was tinned spaghetti, and I couldn't understand why they called it spaghetti. And I was only, I think I was about 6 at the time, and I'm looking at this kind of red mass on top of this plate, and I thought, this is not spaghetti to me. And then eventually, of course, when I went home that night, I said to my mother, they tried to serve me spaghetti, but it didn't look like spaghetti, it didn't taste like spaghetti. Then she went and explained that there's two different types. One that's made in Italy, and the one that they define to have here. So then I realised from then onwards, I started to understand that there were names which were synonymous with